Hello, everyone. Am I glitching? No, I think I'm okay. All right. This is part 3, Benjamin Harrison, a president at the Crossroads. Before we get started, thumbs up, subscribe, and then there's a thanks button here. You can click on that and donate if you'd like. All right. Not much else to say. Let's get into part 3.
Possible, he retreats to the coolness of his home state, Maine. Of the other members of his cabinet, Harrison is closest to Benjamin Tracy, the Secretary of the Navy. That bond was strengthened by a tragedy that befell Tracy in February of 1890.
His house burned down in Washington, and Harrison rushed to the scene, helped administer artificial respiration to resuscitate him, and he also had the very grim duty of telling Tracy that his wife and daughter had died.
Where they were like-minded was in the advancement of American interests. For Harrison, it was through promoting American products. For Tracy, to protect commerce, it was in revitalizing the American fleet, which had fallen from the most powerful in the world during the Civil War to a remnant.
A mighty roar from 15,000 throats rent the air, and the big warship glided from the ways of the cramped shipyard. Her battery of 13 and 8-inch guns is one of the most powerful batteries provided for a United States ship. The Illustrated American.
Congress authorized the building of 3 battleships for a Navy that had none. With the beginnings of a fleet that could patrol 2 oceans, Harrison proved that he would not be afraid to use it.
It was the USS Baltimore that was docked in Chile, and some American sailors took shore leave. And there was...
All right, sorry, I'm trying to get this little fuzz to go away, but it's not.
a big fight, and American sailors were killed. In fact, there were some rumors that local police were involved in this melee and had actually killed some of the American sailors.
Harrison demanded reparations.
The Chilean government stubbornly refused, and Harrison was ready to send a fleet down to Chile.
But cooler heads prevailed. There was no war. Still, with Blaine a consistent no-show, Harrison turns his skills as a negotiator to the world stage. He reopens the European market to American pork after fears of disease had closed it. He settled a controversy between the U.S., Britain, and Canada concerning harvesting the seal population of the Pribilof Islands, issuing the first presidential order to protect an individual species. And at Blaine's urging, he convened a 6-week tour of American factories by delegations from Latin America, and he favored building a transatlantic canal through Nicaragua.
Harrison was a visionary about those questions, and I don't think all presidents would have bought into them.
Now approaching 60, Harrison seemed to be everywhere at once. He personally appeared to open infrastructure projects across the country. He remains true to his goal of advancing African American prestige by naming Frederick Douglass ambassador to Haiti. He was the first to use the railroads to travel to the West Coast, covering 10,000 miles and giving 140 speeches in a month. He saw a West that was rapidly changing character. The last serious confrontation between the United States and the Indian tribes, a massacre at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota, occurred during Harrison's presidency. He cleaned house at the Indian Agency, acknowledging that cuts in rations and delays in following through on treaty obligations were at fault. And he slipped a provision into a Land Revision Act that few congressmen actually read, but which gave him tremendous power.
He put more than 30 million acres of forest under protection as a national forest, the precursor to our national forest system we have today.
Yet no amount of collaboration, passive or otherwise, could smooth over the growing rift between Harrison and his Secretary of State, exacerbated by Harrison's refusal to make Blaine's son, Walker, the Assistant Secretary of State.
He also was the president when electricity was installed in the White House. And he was so terrified of it, and I don't know if they'll get into it, but he was so terrified of it that he wouldn't turn on the lights on or off with the switch because he was scared he was going to get electrocuted. So he would have workers do it, and he would stand nearby with his shoe ready to kick them if they got electrocuted.
Mrs. Blaine never got over this, and neither did her husband. Mrs. Blaine, in her private letters, mocked Caroline Harrison, referred to her as Her American Majesty. In essence,
Well, her husband was the president, and her husband wasn't. So jealousy stinks on some people.
Blaine's thought, those Hoosiers down at the White House, they are sitting in our seats.
The White House that Caroline Harrison inherited was hardly a palace fit for a queen, let alone a first family.
The rats have nearly taken the building, so it has become necessary to get a man with ferrets. They have become so numerous and bold they get up on the table in the upper hall, and one got up on Mr. Halford's bed. Caroline Harrison.
It was vermin-infested, not really decent living quarters.
She ordered it all to be scrubbed and cleaned to try to bring up levels of sanitation, both for the family and for the people that were working there.
And did significant renovations to the rooms, and again, really worked to beautify the White House.
Another thing that we do not do today typically, that very much was a habit in the 19th century, is clipping off pieces of the curtains. It was the people's house, they roamed around, there wasn't the level of security that there is now.
An intruder breaks into the White House, and so Benjamin Harrison comes downstairs, and there's these two guards trying to subdue this intruder, and Benjamin Harrison assists, gets the guy, ties him up with a curtain cord, and turns to the guard and says, "Is there anything more that you require from me?"
But if you're going to build a more secure and more user-friendly place to call home, the First Lady thought, do it with style.
It looks sort of like Versailles. Everything's covered in glass. You've got palms and statues in every which place. There are all these little markings saying we're going to put a palm tree here and we're going to put a statue here. It's almost something you'd find in like a luxury hotel.
But Caroline's vision was prevented by the politics of the time. It seems as though Harrison's traditional ally, Speaker Reed, was miffed over lack of patronage and never brought it to a vote.
She was allotted $30,000 by Congress to make a major overhaul of the White House, and did significant renovations to the rooms, really worked to beautify the White House, to really show it at its best.
He's the first one to put electricity in the White House. He and his wife would not touch the switches. They were afraid of handling the electricity.
Caroline called in a photographer to give the public a first glimpse inside the new White House, Francis Benjamin Johnston. Not surprising, for Caroline Harrison, within the bounds of her influence as First Lady, helped advance women's issues.
Carolyn Harrison, for example, used her reputation to help ensure that women would be admitted to Johns Hopkins to study medicine. She was the First Lady to give public address of her own remarks. She was the First Lady to have a public art exhibition. She was recognized as an expert china painter. She collected the White House china from many generations of presidents.
As a concession to a more habitable living space, the president himself turned his office into a parlor. After all, the White House was getting a little cramped. At any given time, Caroline's father, the children and grandchildren could take up residence. It was also home to her widowed niece, Mary Lord Dimmock, who was called Mame.
She even was granted access to the official code. Sometimes she would decode foreign policy documents to help the president.
You ought to feel very much flattered at how your Uncle Ben thinks of you. Elizabeth Lord.
The media darling of the household is the president's grandson, Benjamin Harrison McKee. The press calls him Baby McKee, the White House pet. It's a colorful time in the Harrison household. Benjamin and Caroline ran herd on a virtual Noah's Ark. Caroline's dog, Dash, several cats, 2 possums gifted to the president named Mr. Protection and Mr. Reciprocity, and a goat named Mr. Whiskers, who often pulled Baby McKee around in a cart.
Without warning, the goat started down executive...
I thought he had a raccoon as well, but I may be trying to record. If you want to hack in the other room. If you're going to cool off, go somewhere else. I'm thinking maybe the possum. Maybe he had a raccoon at home. That could have been it. He could have had a raccoon at home. Sorry.
Avenue on a brisk canter. At the foot of the descent was an excavation where workmen had been repairing the street. The president saw this. His coattails shot straight out behind. The Arkansas Daily Traveler.
He was wheezing like a porpoise. The president, by a brilliant coup, caught the bridle of the fleet-footed goat just before the excavation was reached. General Harrison displayed better running qualities than he did at the polls. The Washington Star.
It is now 1892, and if James G. Blaine is hemming and hawing about running against his boss for the Republican nomination, it must be an election year. Mere weeks before the convention, he resigns as Secretary of State. But Harrison's men are too savvy in the ways of the party apparatus. The contingent known as Blaneiacs is stymied, and Harrison is renominated. It will be an uphill climb to keep the White House. For its expansive vision, the 51st Congress gets the nickname the $1 Billion Congress. But therein lies a problem.
The 1890 Pension Act opens the floodgates. The Harrison administration will begin with a Treasury surplus that's going to just disappear. And by the turn of the 1900s, pensions are a third of the federal budget.
Pensions are granted for any reason. One mother gets funds based on a son who fell off his horse and drowned in a river while deserting. Another elderly wife gets money based on a husband who fell off a ladder.
A lot of young girls ran out to marry these guys who were maybe 60 years old, knowing that someday they would get their pension. Someday soon they would get their pension.
The Republicans are a victim of their own success. They get the pension law, they get the tariff law, they get the Silver Purchase Act, they get the Antitrust Act. They put a lot of measures through, and so there's a lot to criticize.
What we see coming to a head in 1892 is a consequence of the growing inequality of income in the United States. And laborers said, hey, how come we're not getting our fair share? Farmers were in bad shape economically. They succeeded too well in what they did. With mechanization and further land coming under cultivation, they were producing too much and the prices collapsed.
Economic unrest leads to strikes at Carnegie Steel and the Coeur d'Alene silver mines, leading to violence, and a new populist movement is springing up out west to challenge the two-party establishment.
It's clearly not a very well-distributed national growth. You start to see by the late 1880s newspaper stories about the Senate and as a millionaires club. So, they have a very strong message that the Republican Party is a protector of business interests as opposed to working class interests, and doesn't bode well for Harrison in the White House.
Harrison's Democratic rival is once again Grover Cleveland. But Harrison has no heart for the struggle. Caroline is deathly ill with tuberculosis. A planned trip to the Adirondacks has not worked to restore her failing health.
Every morning, for weeks past, a lone and solitary man has been walking in the garden overlooking the Potomac. The president, slowly and with eyes cast down, once-a-week newspaper.
Caroline Harrison dies in the White House just 2 weeks before the election. Out of respect, Cleveland does no campaigning.
What tipped Harrison's way in '88 tipped Cleveland's way in '92, and Harrison lost. He did not carry Indiana. He did not carry New York. He did not carry Illinois. He did not carry Wisconsin.
He might no longer be the incumbent, but Harrison is still an expansionist. Seeking a fueling station in Pearl Harbor, he tacitly accepts the overthrow of the monarchy in Hawaii and urges Congress to annex the islands.
It's the world in which he lived, right? I mean, I think that that's what powerful nations in the period are doing. They are not sort of staying at home, they are expanding. I think a lot of it's commerce, but I don't think that that can be separated away from this idea of American influence. America can bring something different to some of these places.
On a side note, with Hawaii, the annexation was on the desk of Grover Cleveland on his first run. And let me see. 22, 21. So it was on the desk then. I think it was brought up around Chester A. Arthur, the idea. And then Grover Cleveland came in, and I think the Republicans pushed it. Cleveland was a Democrat, so I think he was against it. Then I want to say the House and the Senate became more Democrat, so they clearly weren't going to do it. He gets into office, and one of the reasons why he annexed it was the leader, not the queen of Hawaii, the lady. There was a male, like a president, who had showed up and said that if they were going to be taken over by anybody, they wanted to be taken over by America, because at that same time, Japan was looking at it like, we got to get a foothold in the Pacific because there's potentially oil, or, we need something. And if us in America ever have problems, we need a place where we can kind of have a foothold where we can go out and attack them. And so Japan was looking at it, and the U.S. was. And so when the decision was made, it was, we'll settle with this. Now, I may also be, now that I'm thinking about it, that might have been during McKinley's term. It might have been McKinley's term. So this was just a waste of nothing. That might have been McKinley's term, though. Japan was looking at it. Which Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison is number 23. Grover Cleveland comes back in at 24. Then McKinley comes in at 25. So I don't know, maybe it wasn't solved. I don't know.
It is Harrison's last act as president, one that Grover Cleveland and his philosophy of small government quickly put to an end. In March 1893...
Yep. Okay, so Grover Cleveland puts it aside, and then McKinley comes in, who's a Republican, and that's when he starts eyeballing it. And McKinley is one of the people who is there to, he's kind of a modern president in terms of what he did, getting the Philippines, going to the Spanish-American War, stuff like that. It has nothing to do with Benjamin Harrison. I just have to say it because somebody's going to say, oh, you're wrong, you stupid idiot. So, yes, caught myself, jumped the gun, gave it to him, wasn't him. I'm not done with volume 3 of that book, so, I apologize.
Benjamin Harrison returned to his house on Delaware Street alone. His first day back.
That whole street, by the way, is pretty much like Abraham Lincoln's street in a way. It's all kept the same, except there's a street and stuff like that.
He put flowers on Caroline's grave.
It is fearfully lonesome in this empty house. I have not gotten into visiting habits, and it is very rare that anyone comes in.
Harrison was determined to reinvigorate his law practice. Needless to say, as an ex-president, he could command very high fees, and he did. He had prosperity, he had his family, but there was still something missing, and that was true love.
Before long, everyone noticed the inordinate number of carriage rides that the general was taking with a certain someone. He had reconnected with Mame, Caroline's niece. Over the next 4 years, their relationship blossomed, and with Benjamin Tracy serving as best man, they married. He was 62, she 37.
Russell, the son, and Mary, the daughter, were quite appalled by this. Somehow it was a travesty against their mother.
A year later, daughter Elizabeth was born. Comfortable at last in his twilight years, Harrison writes a book, This Country of Ours, and gives a series of lectures at Stanford University. He takes Mame and Elizabeth with him to Paris as he represents Venezuela in a dispute with British Guiana, showing remarkable endurance, arguing for 25 hours in court. But then, surprising feats of endurance seem to be standard operating procedure for General Harrison.
He was taking his evening stroll near his home on Delaware Street when one of his neighbors burst out of her home and saying that two men who were hurrying down the street had just robbed her home. And Harrison took off after the men, yelling at them to stop and cease and desist. And Harrison himself nabbed one of the robbers.
In February 1901, his legendary resilience left him. Harrison came down with influenza, which soon worsened into pneumonia. At 4:45 in the afternoon of March 13th, he passed away at home in a room filled with relatives and members of his administration. His doctor held his left hand, checking for a pulse. Mame held his right. Neither his son Russell nor his daughter Mary made it back in time. The 70th Indiana marched with their general one final time, circling Monument Circle in Indianapolis before proceeding out to Crown Hill Cemetery and into history.
I think Harrison's administration really deserves re-examination and a rethinking and a questioning about where he really fits in the evolution of the presidency. $1 billion Congress, the 51st Congress, passed a record number of public laws. It was a kind of standout administration.
You think about the fact that a president in the late 19th century is advocating actively for African American voting rights in his inaugural address. That's surprising. You also think about him calling for and signing the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's not what you would expect.
One of the things that surprised me the most is that people don't talk about him more. He's someone who is doing things that aren't necessarily popular, but that I think we could look at from the present day, look back on and say he's making the right decision, which isn't always the easy decision, but he's making the right decision.
You never questioned his sincerity or his work ethic. And it takes going through some tough times politically or economically in this country to say, you know, those dependable qualities, you don't always get, and boy, you miss them when you don't have them.
That he's able in the midst of all of these challenges, all of these difficulties, to find a way,
He's all right.
In October of 1908, as it had 20 years earlier, University Park in Indianapolis was packed with onlookers, some reverential and some merely curious. This time it was to mark the unveiling of a bronze sculpture. Harrison's daughter Elizabeth did the honors. They had come from every state of the Union, but Harrison would forever be Indiana's president.
Loved of all men, choice of a nation's mighty brotherhood, her soldier, statesman, ruler, aye. But then we knew him, long before the world's applause and after, as a neighbor, kind and good, our common friend and fellow citizen. James Whitcomb Riley.
Perhaps Harrison himself had pronounced his own epitaph years before, honoring the memory of Ulysses S. Grant at Mount Gregor, New York. Great lives never go out, he said. They go on.
That was pretty good. Yeah, I'm in the last book. I think I'm 70 pages in of like 270. So don't spoil it for me. I don't want to know what happens. I don't even want to know if he dies. So don't tell me any of that. All right. Well, my kind of assessment of him is that I think he had good judgment. I think he cared about people. He did his best to make sure that soldiers were taken care of, to make sure that poor got taken care of. And there's a part of me that says if you make your side, your party happy all the time, then you're not doing a good job. I think that for every, yeah, that's great, there should also be a, because then that shows that you're not just focused on your people, because you can't be the president of your party. You have to be the president of everybody. That's both parties. So you should do things that are going to not always be beneficial for your side. You have to be open to, yeah, my side isn't going to like this, but this is good for the country. So I'm going to do this. I got to do this. They're not going to like me, but it's beneficial to the country. And I think he tried his best to, I don't want to say ride the fence, but he tried his best to make those decisions that would be beneficial for everyone. And I think as politics has gone on in the country, we don't do that anymore. The 10th president, where are you, bud? John Tyler. William Henry Harrison, his grandfather dies. John Tyler takes over. First off, had to fight to become the president because the cabinet was trying to take that from him. So he becomes president, and his own party kicks him out because he's not passing Whig policies. And he said, I'm not the president of the Whigs, I'm the president of the United States. And they got mad at him. But he wanted to pass things that were beneficial for everybody. And that was when Andrew Jackson stepped in and started telling him, hey, look, Democrats will work with you. So he started working with Democrats, and he was like, I need both sides to be happy. And Democrats were like, you got it. But they were trying to pull more happiness for the Democratic side, but still making sure that it was enough that he could say, look, this is for everybody. And it worked, but the Whigs didn't want him anymore. And then once, of course, he started kicking around the idea of, well, maybe I'll just become a Democrat. Jackson was like, nah, we don't want you, bud. Because he wasn't a true Democrat. They couldn't trust him. So, and then James K. Polk comes in, and James K. Polk was kind of like, these are the 4 things that I'm going to do, and I don't care what anyone else thinks. And he did all 4 things. It only took him 3 years. He said he needed 4. So, yeah. But, yeah, I think that it's important that your side can't always win. Because if your side's always winning, then you're not caring about the country. You're caring about the party. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times that's what we do. You know, we stick to our base. And that's not beneficial. I'm going to shut up now because it doesn't matter what I think. So I'm going to end this here. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to, I'm kind of thinking about doing a presidential series and just start, I've done Washington a ton because I like Washington. I've done Lincoln a couple times. Have another Lincoln. Now Harrison. Benjamin Harrison. And so I'm kind of looking at my bookshelf and I'm just randomly picking out things. Oh, I've done a Jackson because I went to Jackson's house. But another one I'm thinking of is Franklin Pierce because he's got a very sad story. So maybe I'll find a video on Franklin Pierce next. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, have a good day. Have a good night. Well, you tell me, is there anybody that you would care to see, you know, that I did a video about? Because I think that'd be good. Also, if that person's nearby, I can cover a video and maybe I can also go there. People, right off the bat, people near me. Obviously, Jackson I've done. Lincoln I've done. I can go up to Grant's house in Galena. Let's see. Herbert Hoover's house is in Iowa. He's got a chunk of the Berlin Wall there. I'd have to look into it, but I could go up to Reagan's house, his boyhood home. Sorry, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I'm looking at presidents, just seeing who rings a bell. see who's all near me. Vincennes, Indiana, so I can go to Benjamin Harrison. William Henry Harrison. I can go to Benjamin Harrison's home again. I wouldn't mind doing that. William Henry Harrison's home. Fort Sackville's nearby, which I've covered that recently. I do want to go to Ohio because there's about 4 presidents there, but that would be like a 3 or 4 day trip to cover all those presidential homes. I'm just blathering now. Wouldn't mind going down to Bill Clinton's presidential library. Let's see. Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower. I've done both of those. Be happy to go back and do them again. I should have made shorts when I was there, but I didn't. It feels really weird to film, by the way, because people are just looking at you. Anyways, Andrew Johnson, he's in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's another one I could do. I'm just going to keep talking, apparently. Anyways, I'm just going to shut up now. But you tell me. All right? Till next time, have a good day. Have a good night.